He settled a feed debt with a human life. Dust swelled above the market road as John Calder tied off his team. The noon sun hammered tin roofs. Crates clacked. Men argued over seat and nails. At the corral rail, a thin bay mare flicked her ears. Beside her stood a girl in a plain dress. Her eyes were steady. Her hands were still. "Feed's 3 months past," F. Withrow said, loud enough for all to hear. "Ain't charity." The girl's father wobbled sour with drink. "Take the mare back then," he slurred. "Or take the girl till it squares." Sheriff Pike watched from the shade. John felt the words land like a dropped iron. He saw the mare's ribs. He saw the girl's bare feet in the dust. He did not look away. "I'll settle it," he said. He set coins on the rail. "The mare comes with me." He looked at the girl. "You too, if you will." She nodded once. No sound, no plea, only a breath steady as a lamp. John loaded a sack of oats and a jar of beans. The mare followed. The girl climbed up without touch or help. Her hands rested on her skirts, then on the wagon board open to the wind. They drove east where grass stood high and the sky ran on. John kept the reins light. He wanted to talk and did not know how. "I'm John," he said at last. "Calder." She tapped her chest twice, then pointed to his receipt. With a pencil, she wrote a single name in small, neat letters. Mara. At the ranch house, the door creaked as it had waited. John set a pot on the stove and opened a jar. Beans warmed. Bread cut. Plate set. They ate in quiet that does not bruise. When the plates were clean, Mara wiped the table with a damp cloth. Then she drew her fingers over the wood, tracing lines like a tracker's map. Her hands moved north to south, curved toward the barn, then lifted. John listened to the hush and watched her hands. "Wind?" he asked. Mara nodded. She showed her path again, simple and sure. The cottonwoods whispered beyond the barn. Far off, a thin cloud smudged the rim of sky. John felt the house listen with him there. Outside, the mare tossed her head as if the unseen had arrived. Morning came pale and dry. John rose early, lit the stove, and checked the pens. Mara was already outside, skirt pinned for work, hair tied back. The bay mare nosed an empty bucket and snorted. John lifted the pump handle. "We'll water first," he said. Mara touched his sleeve and pointed to the corral latch. It hung easily over the post. She shook her head and pressed her palm flat, then tilted it, showing fall. He walked closer. The pin had a hairline crack where the ring looped through. Wind tugged the gate. A colt inside tossed and shouldered the rail. "I see it," John said. He fetched a spare bolt from the shed. Before he reached the gate, the latch slipped. The gate swung. The colt surged forward, then checked when Mara stepped in, slow as dusk, both hands lifted. She breathed out long and steady. The colt blinked, snorted, and lowered its head. John slid the new bolt through and set the nut tight. He looked at her hands. "You saved us a chase." She gave a small smile and pointed toward the barn roof. She shaped a wedge between her fingers, then lifted 2 fingers like pillars. John frowned, then understood. A sagging beam. Inside the barn, dust hung like thin lace. John climbed the ladder to the loft and pressed on the center beam. It groaned. He whistled low. "You were right." He cut 2 cedar shims, tapped them home, and the sound turned sure. When he climbed down, Mara waited with a broom. She swept the chips into her palm and carried them outside like something to keep. They worked through the heat with few words. She checked the water trough with a finger, nodded when it cooled her skin, and guided the mare to shade. John mended a harness strap. She stitched the loose binding with even, neat bites of thread. His house, once a quiet shell, held motion that made sense. At noon, they ate bread and cold beans. After, she went to the stove and took the slate chalk from the nail. She wrote in careful letters, "River smells wrong." Then she drew a wavy line and a second line beside it, thick and close. John felt the hair rise on his forearms. He looked toward the south draw where the cottonwood stood. The air was still, but the silence felt very watchful. John saddled the bay mare slowly, letting her sniff the blanket and the lead. Mara stood by the porch with her slate. She wrote 3 words, "Go see now." Then she lifted her chin toward the south draw. They took the wagon track, dust soft under the wheels. Meadowlarks hopped from fence posts ahead. Mara kept one hand on the seatboard, palm down, and sometimes she tapped twice as if counting breaths in the earth. John watched her and tried to feel what she felt. He could not yet, but he wanted to try. The cottonwoods showed first against the sky. When they reached the bend, the river lay low and brown, but a sour, wet smell rode the air like old eggs and iron. Mara touched John's wrist and pointed to the bank. A strip of fresh mud, the color of coffee, ran along the edge. Above it, a shelf of soil hung out past the water with grass still rooted in it. "Undercut," John said. "She's eating from below." Mara crouched, pressed her fingers to the ground, and closed her eyes. She listened. After a time, she drew 2 short lines on the damp dirt, one higher than the other. Then she moved the lower line forward the length of her hand. "Rising?" John asked. She nodded once and stood. She looked upstream, then to the schoolhouse roof beyond the rise. Her mouth set straight. She stepped back from the edge and led John to a cottonwood with a scar on its trunk. She set her palm flat there, then moved it up an inch like a mark for a child's height. "All right," John said. "We'll warn Pike and Mrs. Keene." On the ride home, Mara taught him 2 signs, danger, bell. She showed danger by slicing her hand across her chest. She showed bell by pinching fingers and swinging them. John copied, clumsy but willing. She smiled and fixed his wrist so his hand swung true. Back at the ranch, clouds bunched softly. John fixed the fence at the south lot. Mara rolled flour, cut biscuits, and set stew to simmer. When they ate, the room felt less lonely. He poured her coffee. She tapped the rim twice, "Thank you," and drew a bell on the table with steam from her cup. John hoped the next sound in his house would be that bell, not the river. The wind shifted in the night, and the day smelled of iron and sage. John walked the fence line with a hammer and a pocket of nails. Mara followed with a bucket and a length of twine. She touched grass tips, then the dirt, then her cheek, as if tasting weather with her skin. At the south plot, she knelt and pressed her wrist into the soil. She waited, eyes, then lifted her wrist to John's jaw. The skin felt cool, then warm. She held up 2 fingers and drew a sun in the dust. "Warm enough?" John asked. She nodded and made the shape of a seed between finger and thumb. He fetched the sack. Together they set rows by the width of his palm. She tapped his hand when his stride went wide, and he adjusted. It felt good to be corrected without shame. A rider showed on the road, badge glinting in the bright light. Sheriff Pike reined in at the fence. Morning called her. His eyes shifted to Mara. "Heard talk at the market. You do right by her, you mind how it looks?" Mara stood quietly, hands loose. John answered even, "I'll mind what is right." Pike tipped his hat. "River's been sly. Keep kids back from the bank." He nodded toward the rise where the schoolhouse roof cut the sky. "Mrs. Keene's keeping an eye." When the sheriff moved on, Mara drew a bell in the dirt and tapped it twice. John said, "We'll help ring it if needed." She smiled with her eyes and went back to sleep. By noon, the wind lay down. They ate under the cottonwoods behind the house. Bird stitched the shade with sounds. After lunch, Mara walked into the barn, stopped under the repaired beam, and set her palm in thanks. John saw it and felt something settle inside him like a knot pulled tight. In the afternoon, she taught him more signs: water, wait, danger, and good. He taught her one of his own, coffee, by miming the pour and the sip. She laughed without sound, shoulders bright. On the porch, he shaped the sign again and pointed to the pot at dusk. She nodded and traced a circle on the table where a cup might rest. The mare breathed easily. The house held quiet, which worked. From off, a bell practice rang and went still. Night came kindly, but the river did not sleep. They hitched the wagon at first light and rolled toward town with eggs, 2 wheels of cheese, and a sack of oats for trade. The road was quiet except for larks. Mara watched the dust fall behind them like soft rain. She laid her hand flat on the seat now and then. feeling the faint thrum of the ground. Main Street held more eyes than words. A woman at the well lowered her bucket slowly. Two men on a porch paused their cards. F. Withrow leaned against a post and smirked. "Calder," he called. "You buying help that can't holler?" John kept his voice level. "She works. That's worth more than holler." Mara did not look at F. She touched the bell cord hanging from the church eave and then the rope at the schoolhouse porch. The school rope felt rough, tired. She tugged and a thin thread snapped in her fingers. She showed the fray to Mrs. Keene, who stood in the doorway with chalk on her skirt. "Good eye," Mrs. Keene said. "I'll splice it." She smiled at Mara like a neighbor and put the girl's hand on the new rope coil. "Would you tie the knot for me?" Mara tied a clean bowline, neat as sewing. The bell gave one soft note. Children clapped, then ran to their slates. A small boy with freckles lingered. "I'm Tommy," he said to John and then to Mara. "Can you hear me?" He waved his hand in front of his own ear. Mara shook her head, then touched the porch boards, then her own chest, then his chest. She drew a quick house on the step with the chalk nub, a stick figure inside, a line from the door to the yard. Tommy grinned. "You here with everything?" He ran inside. Sheriff Pike crossed the street and spoke low. "River's creeping. If it jumps the bank, I'll ring that bell till the rope burns." "We'll listen," John said. Back at the wagon, F spoke again, louder. "You keep a witch, trouble finds you." A few men chuckled without humor. John looked at their shoes, then at their faces. "She stays under my roof," he said, simple, final. Mara touched his sleeve once. "Not warning, thanks." They drove home with flour and a new file. The bay mare pulled steadily. Afternoon heat lay heavy on the grass. When they passed the south draw, the smell of iron thickened. Mara watched the cottonwoods, then the sky. She pressed her palm to the wagon board. Her fingers tapped twice. "Wait, listen." Clouds stacked low over the panhandle, slow as cattle. John checked the fence line with a draw knife and nails. Mara walked beside him with twine and chalk, stopping then to press her hand to the ground. When she stood, her palm kept a memory. She flexed her fingers like she was reading a book no one else could see. They reached the east lot. A skittish colt was circling the pen, whites of his eyes showing. Mara did not hurry. She slid her hand along the rail, then breathed out, long and even. The colt matched her breath without knowing. John watched the fear leave his shoulders. "You've got a gift," he said. She held up both hands, then pointed to the colt, then to him. "Share. Learn." They fixed the sag in the chicken shed with cedar wedges. John lifted the roof slat. Mara tapped the brace once, then twice, telling him where to set the nail. The shed settled square as if grateful. Work made the morning pass honestly. By noon the wind turned warm and wet. It carried the egg and iron smell from the river. John glanced south. "We'll walk the draw after lunch." Mara nodded and wrote on her slate, "After school ring." They ate bread, onion, and the last of the stew. After, Mara scrubbed the table and traced the bell sign in the damp grain. John's mouth set. "If Pike rings, we go." Whispers arrived before the storm. A pair of riders paused at the gate and stared too long. One spat and said, "Calder's gone soft." The other shrugged. "Soft men build weak fences." They rode on. Mara watched them with a calm face, then drew two straight lines on her slate and set them firmly. John felt his back do the same. They were still settling tools when a thin figure ran up the lane. Mrs. Keene's skirt snapped in the wind. Her bonnet string whipped her jaw. "Tommy didn't come back from recess," she said, voice tight. "We've searched the yard and creek path. No sign." Mara stepped forward, breath steady. She set her palm to the dirt of the lane, closed her eyes, and waited. Her hand shifted left, toward the cedar breaks beyond the school rise. She opened her eyes and gave a small nod. Pike's bell stayed silent still. "Cedar Hollow," John said. He grabbed a rope and a lantern. "Let's go." They moved quickly but carefully. John looped the rope across his chest and handed the lantern to Mara. She shook her head and tapped the glass. Daylight still held. She pointed toward the cedar line where the ground dipped. At the first break, Mara crouched and touched the dust. 2 small toe marks showed. Heel was scuffed. She mimed a boy's short stride. John breathed out. Tommy. Mara nodded, set 3 stones in a row, then rose and walked on, letting her hand hover inches above the ground. Cedar needles softened all sound. A fly droned. Far off, the river muttered under the wind. Mara stopped beside a patch of crushed grass and held up 2 fingers. Wait. Listen. John went still until his heartbeat slowed to feel the world. A faint hiccup reached them, then a gulping breath like someone trying not to cry. Mara angled left through the brush. They found the boy wedged between roots, face streaked with dirt, one ankle trapped under a fallen limb. His eyes were wide and wet. I didn't mean to, he whispered. I chased a rabbit. Then I slipped. John knelt and checked the limb. Not heavy, but twisted deep. We'll get you out. He wrapped the rope around the branch and handed the bitter end to Mara. She planted her feet, leaned back, and drew steady as a well pull. The limb shifted. John lifted it clean. Tommy yanked his ankle free with a sharp breath. Mara tapped the boy's shin and then her own ear, asking about pain or sound. Tommy sniffed. Hurts some. John touched the bone gently, no break. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped the ankle firmly while Mara stroked the calf in lines until the boy's shaking faded. Think you can ride my back? John asked. Tommy nodded. John stood, the boy holding his shoulders. Mara led them out, marking the path with stone stacks in case Pike came late. At the school rise, Mrs. Keene ran to meet them, tears bright. She took Tommy's face in both hands. You're found. Her voice shook. F. Withrow appeared near the fence, eyes narrowed. Lucky, he said, tone cold. Mara set her palm to the ground, then lifted it as if raising truth to daylight. Lucky had little to do with it. Clouds gathered over the draw, gray as wet wool hats today. The bell never needed to ring. Dusk slid down the flats like a blanket. John stacked kindling by the stove and checked the door latch. Mara washed the plates and set them to dry on a clean cloth. The house felt steady, like a wagon in the right rut. Far off, a lantern bobbed, then another. Hoofbeats clicked slowly on the road. The bay mare stirred in her stall. Mara looked at John and touched the table edge, then made the sign for danger, hand cutting across her chest. John blew out the lamp in the front room and stepped onto the porch. 5 men came through the gate. F. Withrow led them, hat brim low, mouth hard. 2 carried ropes, not quite hidden. One had a shovel across his shoulder like a threat. Evening, Calder, F. said. We got questions about the girl you brought home. She has a name, John said. Mara. F's eyes slid past him toward the window. Names don't fix curses. My herd scattered last night. Bell rope frayed. River stinks. Folks notice it all started when you hauled a mute into town. Mara stood in the doorway behind John, small and still. She lifted her hand and drew a simple wave in the air, the sign she used for river. Then she pointed south to the bend none of them could see from here. John understood. The danger wasn't her. He stepped down to the packed earth and let the porch rail rest against his thigh. She found a boy today, he said. She fixes what breaks. She stays under my roof. The men shifted. Boots scraped. Someone spit. The shovel man muttered. Could be tricks. Could make sense, John said. Go home. Tie your stock high. Check the river bank before dawn. F took 2 slow steps closer. The night pressed in around them. From the lane, a second horse snorted. Sheriff Pike rode up, rein slicker unbuttoned, badge dull in the lantern light. Evening, Pike said. We're not doing this. If you've got a complaint, file it in daylight. F's jaw sawed, then settled. He tipped his hat like a man paying a tax and turned his horse. The others followed. Lanterns bobbed away into the dark like stars. John stood until the road went quiet. Mara touched his sleeve once, then set a cup on the table for him and one for her. The house breathed again. Dawn brushed the windows pale. John set a cedar plank on sawhorses and marked a neat square. He cut slowly, planed the edges smooth, and rubbed ash into the grain. When the wood felt kind under his palm, he carved a shallow lip around the face. He fitted a thin slate tile inside and fixed it with 4 tiny brads. The piece looked like a small window waiting for the weather. Mara stepped into the shed doorway and watched. Her eyes smiled before her mouth did. John held the board out shy. "For your words," he said. "So you don't have to borrow my table every meal." She set her hands on the frame, tested the weight, and nodded once. She drew a finger along the lip, then tapped her pocket. Chalk. He handed her a stick, fresh and square. She wrote her name small in the corner, then wrote his. Careful but sure, Jon. After that, she drew a hearth with a line of smoke, and beside it 2 cups side by side. "Looks right," he said softly. They carried the slate inside and hung it by the stove on a nail. Mara wrote 3 more words. "I work here." Then she pointed to him and tapped the 2nd cup she had drawn. He understood and filled the coffee pot. The day moved honestly. He trimmed the south fence and reset a leaning post. She checked the bean rows and pushed soil gently against thin stalks. When the wind rose, she stood with eyes closed and counted under her breathless breath, measuring gusts by the lift of her hair. John watched, learning without pride. At noon she mended his worn glove. Her stitches made tidy ladders that would not give. He carved a small handle on the barn door so her fingers would not slip. Little trades, each one a thread. Afternoon darkened early. A roll like barrels far away turned in the sky. They stood under the porch and looked south toward the cottonwoods. The smell of iron came stronger, and the air lay heavy on their skin, as if listening back. Mara touched the bell sign, then wrote on the slate near the stove, "If it rises, ring early." John nodded and set the lanterns by the door. He laid the rope coiled and ready. The house waited with them, steady as a good horse at the gate. Night came with a soft wind. John lit the lamp low and poured coffee. Mara sat at the table with her new slate. The house made small sounds, the tick of the cooling stove iron, the mare shifting in her stall, the rope on a nail. It felt like a room learning to breathe. John tried a sign he had practiced, "Thank you." His hand moved clumsily. Mara fixed his wrist gently and set it right. He nodded, a little embarrassed, a little proud. "I don't talk much," he said. "Wasn't always that way." He looked at the empty chair across from him. Silence got heavy after a loss. He did not say more. He did not need to. Mara drew 2 lines on the slate. A table with 1 cup, then the same table with 2 cups. She pointed to the second and looked at him. He understood. He stood, fetched another plate, and set it across from his. The sound of the china on wood felt like a small oath. She wrote again, slower. "I hear with skin, ground, wind." Then a small sketch of a girl, a man with a bottle, a mare, and a coin. She touched the coin and shook her head. "Not worth it." John's jaw tightened. "You are not a debt," he said. "You are a person under my roof." His voice stayed even, but the words sat like posts set deep. They spoke in the simple ways they had. Chalk, signs, looks. He told her about the land, how the south draws floods fast, how the schoolyard dips where the bedrock runs close. She drew a rope plan, anchor at the porch post, 3 adults spaced, children clipped in pairs. She wrote, "Practice 1 time." He nodded. "At first bell," he said, "if Pike agrees." For a long minute they listened to the night. A coyote barked far off. The wind pressed under the eaves and went on. Mara wrote a short line and slid the slate to him. "Decency is a fence you mend every day." He read it twice and then said it aloud, slow like a verse he meant to keep. Before bed, he checked the door and hung the lantern by the handle for quick reach. Mara wiped the table and left a small drawing in the corner, 2 boots by a hearth. She touched the drawing once as if blessing it. The quiet felt lighter. The bell rang once in clear morning air. John and Mara reached the schoolyard early with a rope coiled neatly and 2 spare lanterns. Mrs. Keene met them on the porch, face bright. Sheriff Pike stood by the rail, hands on his belt, watching the sky and the river bend. Mara laid the rope across the steps and showed the plan. She pointed to the porch post for the anchor, then to 3 places along the rope where adults would stand. She touched her chest for the first spot, then pointed to Mrs. Keene and John for the next 2. She drew pairs of small stick figures to show how children should clip in with loops. Pike nodded. "We'll try it." He looked at the class. "This is practice. Not fear. Practice." Mara tied a clean knot around the post and handed the bitter end to John. He wrapped it twice around his waist and set his boots. Mrs. Keene took her place in the middle. Mara led the front pair of children, each with a loop she had made from old reins. They moved down the steps and across the yard along a chalk line she had drawn, calling it the water. The children stepped carefully, then more sure. The rope held steady. The smaller ones looked brave in the way of small ones copying calm. Townsfolk paused at the fence. A few mothers came near. F. Withrow rode up and leaned on his saddle horn. "Parade tricks," he said, but he did not ride off. Mara raised a hand and stopped the line. She turned to the watching crowd and tapped her ear, then the ground, then the rope. "Here together." She lifted the first child's loop and set it right with a small smile. The boy grinned like he had learned a secret handshake. They ran the drill again, faster. John paid out slack and kept the line true. Mrs. Keene coaxed the middle pairs with soft words. Pike timed them and did not say the number, but his mouth set in a way that meant good. When they finished, Mrs. Keene faced the yard and the fence. "If the river jumps," she said, "we follow Mara's lead." She put her hand on Mara's shoulder like a badge. "She is our best listener." For a breath, even F said nothing. Then Pike spoke plainly. "All right. If the bell rings, we move as shown." No arguing at the post. Mara wiped the chalk line with her shoe. The sky watched. Clouds held their breath all afternoon. John and Mara walked the fence on the south side again, not talking much, only trading small signs like passing tools. At the cottonwoods, the river spoke in a deeper voice, a throat clearing before a shout. Mara felt the ground with her wrist and stared upstream. She set 2 pebbles on a stump an inch apart, then moved one closer. He understood. Time was shrinking. Back at the house, they shared coffee and a heel of bread. The bay mare nosed John's shoulder for a scratch. He smiled and obliged. Mara drew a short line on her slate. Quiet as work, too. He said it aloud and let the words stay in the room like heat. Toward evening, Pike rode in, dust on his hat brim. He stayed in the saddle. "There's talk," he said. "F is gathering men tonight. Says he'll put the girl on a stage to Amarillo by dawn. Claims he's protecting the town." John's eyes went level. "He will not cross this gate." "I agree," Pike said, voice careful. "But folks lean his way when the river scares them. Sundown to sunup, keep your lamp lit and your rope near. If trouble starts, I'll stand with you, but I can't be 2 places at once." Mara listened and then wrote, "We plant our feet." She drew the porch post and the coil of rope. She added a key on a nail. John nodded. He fetched a brass key from a drawer, hammered a nail into the door frame, and hung it where she pointed. "Your place," he said. They ate beans and onions at the table, the window open to the smell of rain that was not yet rain. Mara taught him the sign for stand, 2 fingers rooted to the palm, and the sign for us, hands circling over both their chests. He repeated them until his hands remembered. Night fell tight. A coyote called once and quit. John set the rifle by the door and checked the latch. Mara wiped the table and left a chalk line at the edge, straight and clean. She wrote one more sentence. "A house is a promise kept each night." They slept light, boots by the bed, lantern trimmed low. Outside, the river rolled its shoulders in the dark, testing its banks the way a horse tests a bit. The sky did not blink. Wind hit before rain. It came in a hard line across the flats, pushing dust like a broom. The cottonwoods bent and hissed. John stepped onto the porch and watched the sky turn gunmetal. Mara stood beside him with the slate hugged to her chest, eyes steady. A fat drop struck the step. Another tapped his hat brim. Then the rain opened like a door. The world went gray and loud. John grabbed the rope coil and slung it over his shoulder. Mara pointed south, then to the bell sign, then to her wrist like a clock. "We go," John said. They ran the wagon road, heads down against the wet. Water sheeted off the rise and cut small rills that grew fast. At the schoolhouse, Mrs. Keene already had the children in 2 lines on the porch, faces bright. Sheriff Pike stood at the post with his hands on the rope. He rang once, clear and steady. Mara took the front. She looped her waist and clipped the first pair with the reins she'd saved. John took the middle. Mrs. Keene was the last. Pike moved to the downstream side, bracing like a post in flood. They stepped off the porch into running water. It swirled at their boots and tugged at their shins. Clay turned slick underfoot. Mara lifted her hand and signed slowly. "Breathe." The line breathed. They moved. A hay bale shot past, then a tin pan, then a board with a nail that flashed. John guided the middle pairs around a dark hole where the yard had slumped. A child cried out. Mrs. Keene spoke a soft count, 1 to 10, over and over. The cry steadied. They reached the rock step at the far bank. Pike hauled the rope hand over hand until the first child scrambled onto high ground. Neighbors formed a grip chain and pulled small bodies up and over, wet as stones. Mara kept the front pair moving, then the next, then the next. A shout rose from the downstream fence. F. Withrow, horse chest deep, flailed at a tangle of wire. The animal's eyes rolled white. F. cursed the current and hit the water like a man. Mara saw him. She looked to John. He nodded once. She signed danger, then bell. He set his feet and paid out 6 feet more rope. They turned together toward the shout. The river answered with a pull. John looped the rope across his chest and braced. Mara slid down the bank on her hip, one hand on a root, the other holding the free end. Water shoved hard against her legs. She planted her boots, leaned back, and pointed to F's shoulder where the wire bit. "Hold!" John shouted. Pike caught the line and locked it around the post. The current yanked, humming like bees. Mara made a chopping sign at F, still. He froze, breath ragged. She reached the fence stake first. The wire whined. Mara pressed it flat with her palm to stop the whip, then signed to John. "Pull slow." John took up an inch. The wire eased. She worked the strand over the horse's chest with careful fingers, never jerking. The gelding blew and stood because she stood. F tried to push free too soon. The wire snapped back and sliced his sleeve. Mara grabbed his collar and thumped his sternum once. "Wait." Her face did not beg. It commanded. John pulled again. Pike kept the slack true. 2 neighbors waded in to steady the horse. With a final twist, the last loop slid off. Mara slapped the gelding's neck and pointed upstream. The animal surged and found footing. F stumbled and went to his knees on the gravel bar, coughing upriver. He looked up at Mara, rain in his eyes, pride bleeding. He started, then shut his mouth and bowed his head. In the downpour, it looked like prayer. They moved back to the school line. Only 3 children remained. Mara led them across knee-deep. The rope sang. John's shoulders burned, but the line held. Pike lifted the last pair to high ground, then swung the bitter end around the post and tied off tight. When the yard cleared, neighbors cheered like a dam had broken the other way. Mrs. Keene hugged muddy faces and checked scrapes. Mara stood with hands open, breathing slowly, eyes on the water until her body said safe. Then she nodded once to no one. Pike clapped John's shoulder. "That was work done right." He turned to Mara. His voice went softer. "Ma'am, you saved a dozen." F limped over, hat gone. He tried to meet Mara's gaze and couldn't. He settled for John. "I was wrong." "Fix it," John said. F swallowed. "I will." The rain eased to a hiss. The bell rope dripped, whole and strong. Rain thinned to threads and then to mist. The schoolyard turned to churned clay, cut with boot prints and small bare feet. Mrs. Keene lined the children on the porch and counted heads twice. Mothers wrapped shawls around shivering shoulders. Pike told 2 men to check the far bridge and send word if planks had gone. The town breathed like a chest after a hard run. F. Withrow stood by the bell post with a hat in his hands. His face looked older. He cleared his throat, failed, and tried again. "I spoke wrong," he said, voice plain. "About the girl. She saved my horse. She saved our own." He looked at Pike, then at the porch, then at Mara, and could not hold her eyes long. "I'll say it on Sunday again if I need to." Mrs. Keene stepped forward. "Say it now," she said kindly but firm. F lifted his chin. "Mara, I was wrong." The words fell like nails set true. Pike nodded once. "Heard." He faced the fence line where neighbors gathered. "If anyone troubles this ranch again, he answers to the badge and to me." No one argued. The bell rope dripped in quiet. John led Mara under the school eave where dry space held. He took her hand, rough and wet, and squeezed once. She squeezed back. She shivered then, now that work was over. He put his coat around her shoulders. She pulled it close and breathed. They walked home slowly along the high path. The river poured on below, wider, but its voice had lost its edge. At the porch, John lit the stove and set socks to dry on the rail. He poured coffee and held the cup between her hands. She sipped and closed her eyes as if feeling warmth through her bones. He brought his long table outside to the light and set it on sawhorses. With a plane, he shaved the edge to a smooth lip so the slate would not wobble. Curl after curl fell, pale and sweet-smelling. Mara watched, then set her palm on the new edge and slid it along, approving. He hammered a small brass hook under the window for her slate. She hung it there and wrote, "Work heard." They ate soup and bread. After, she drew a simple map of the day on the slate. Bell, rope, children, horse, hands. Under it she wrote a short line. "We stood." John said it aloud and looked at her. "We stood." Morning rose clean after the storm. The flat steamed. The cottonwoods shook off beads of water like horses after a swim. John checked the fence, tugged each post, and felt the land breathe easier. Mara swept the porch and propped the door wide so the house could air. A rider appeared at the gate. Sheriff Pike swung down, hat in hand. "Town settled," he said. "Bridge held. No children lost. That's on you two." He glanced at Mara, then squared himself. "And for the record, miss, I was slow to see. I see now." He touched his badge, a pledge. Mara dipped her head once, then drew her hand over her heart and outward. "Thanks." Pike tried the sign back, a little crooked. She smiled and straightened his wrist. John hid a grin and looked away. They rode into town after chores with eggs and a spare strap. Main Street felt different, as if boards had been planed smoother overnight. Mrs. Keene waved them over. Children crowded the steps, chattering brightly. "Show her," the teacher said. Tommy stepped forward, ankle wrapped neatly. He signed slowly, shy but proud. "Thank you, Rope, brave." The other kids copied. Messy at first, then better until the porch looked like a field of small flags. Mara laughed without sound and touched each small wrist to guide it right. F. Withrow crossed the street carrying a coil of new rope. He stopped short of the steps. "For the school bell," he said, voice even. "And I'd set posts at the low yard if you'll advise me." He looked at Mara when he said it. Nodded John. The town noticed. At the store, Mr. Dugan held up a ledger. "Your credit is clean, Calder, and the lady's work saved more than coin." He wrapped coffee and a tin of peaches. No one used the word which. Back at the ranch, John brought his table in. He planed the other edge smooth and rubbed oil into the wood until it shone. Then he set 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 spoons, and stood back. The sight was enough. Mara hung her slate on its hook and wrote one word. Build. Then she drew a key on the door frame where her real one hung. John nodded. "We'll build," he said. "Fence, trust, and home." Outside, the river muttered like an old man settling to sleep. John built without fuss. He cut a narrow shelf from a scrap of cedar and screwed it under the window where the morning light fell. He planed the edge smooth and set a small lip so chalk would not roll. Then he made a shallow drawer from an apple crate and fitted it beneath. He set 3 things inside, chalk sticks, a folded rag, and a pencil worn short. Mara watched his hands work. When he stepped back, she slid the drawer open and closed, testing the glide. She placed her slate on the shelf and wrote a single word. Place. Then she drew a small key beside it and tapped the nail where her real key hung. Her mouth made the shape of a smile that did not need sound. John took a strip of leather and nailed it beside the door. "For your shawl," he said. She looped the fabric there and pressed it flat once, a little ceremony. He took the pot from the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee. When he handed her one, he touched 2 fingers to the table between them and then to his chest. "Us." She answered with the same sign, sure and gentle. After breakfast, they walked in the yard. He showed her the spot where a spring seeped under the cottonwoods and how he kept the trough clean by scraping moss with a flat stick. She showed him how to read ant lines after rain, how their paths dodged the soft ground, warning of sink. They traded knowledge like fair goods. At noon, Mrs. Keene stopped by with a wrapped bundle. Inside lay a slim booklet she'd drawn by hand, simple pictures of hands making signs: water, fire, rope, friend, home. "For both of you," she said. Mara touched the page that said home and then touched the lintel. She did not speak, but the porch seemed to hear. When the teacher left, John set his palm flat on the table and slid it forward. Learn. He tried new signs: table, bread, safe, steady. He was slow and wrong at first. Mara guided his wrists, patient as mending. "Slow right is better than fast wrong," he said. She wrote it on the slate and underlined it once. A short line to keep. The evening went gold. He hung a small iron bell by the porch, not for alarm now, but for calling to supper. It gave a warm note when touched. Mara struck it with a finger and nodded. They did not need many words to know what it meant. Sunday came bright and calm. The town smelled of wet dust drying in the sun. John hitched the bay and drove Mara in. She wore her plain dress and shawl, key on its nail at home, promise kept even when not seen. At the churchyard, neighbors nodded without strain. Children tugged her sleeve and showed clumsy signs for water and rope. She fixed their wrists and smiled with her eyes. Mrs. Keene met them with a tin of cookies and a look that said, "Family." Inside, pews creaked. The preacher spoke simply, "Thanks for lives spared and for hands that listened." He did not say Mara's name, but the whole room turned a little toward her all the same. When the hymn rose, she watched the air move and kept time with her fingers on the bench, like counting the river's breath. After F. Withrow hauled a new post to the schoolyard and set it in wet earth. He worked with his hat off. "For the low corner," he said. "On my land side." He handed Mara the tamping rod. She packed the soil hard and level. He tried to meet her eyes and almost managed. "If you'll advise fence line, I'll hear it," he said. She touched ground, then drew a straight course with her finger. He followed. Sheriff Pike brought a small card from his desk. On it, he had drawn the sign for help and the sign for stop. "Might post these in the office window," he said. "Folks can learn quick." He tried both signs. They weren't perfect. Honest, by noon the town felt easier. No one used the wrong words. No one asked if she could hear. They asked what she noticed. She knelt and sniffed the wind and said much with her hands. Home again, John hung a narrow rail by the table to hold her slate steady while she worked. She tested it, wrote a clean line, then drew his name and hers linked by a short dash. He looked at the mark and at her. He set 2 plates without thinking and filled 2 cups. They ate stew and sat quietly. After, he straightened his shoulders and signed, slow and careful, "I hear you." The shapes were crooked, but the meaning stood. Mara lifted his hands and corrected only one small angle. "Close enough," her smile said. The house agreed then. Wind dried the last puddles. The flats turned bright and clean. John checked the fence line and found it straight as a rule. New posts stood where the low ground used to be. He patted one and felt pride like a weight in his palm. Mara walked the row beside him, fingertips brushing each wire staple as if counting heartbeats. When a staple sat shallow, she tapped it twice. John set it deeper with 2 clean blows. In town, the schoolyard was open again. Children skittered like swallows. Mrs. Keene held up a page from her booklet and taught the day's two signs: careful and together. Little hands followed. The bell rang once for recess, just a bell, not a warning. Laughter answered. Sheriff Pike had posted the help and stop cards in his window. A mother stood reading them aloud to her boy. She practiced the hands and smiled when they made sense. Across the street, F. Withrow stacked fresh rails. He didn't talk much now, he worked. When he saw John and Mara, he lifted a rail and set it where she pointed, no fuss. Repair was his apology. John bought coffee, nails, and a length of canvas for a porch shade. Mr. Dugan added a tin of peaches. For the house that listens, he said, half a joke, wholly kind. No one glanced sideways at Mara. They asked her about the weather, stock, and soil. She answered with her hands in chalk. People watched her hands as if listening to music. Back home, John hung the canvas and made a shade line that held steady in the wind. He set 2 chairs under it and brushed the dust from a rough footstool. Mara brought her slate shelf outside and drew today's small map. Fence, bell, children, cup. She added one more mark, a tiny key by the door sketch. He saw it and felt something loosen inside, like a knot letting go. They ate simple stew and tore warm bread. The house felt full without noise. After, John took a thin strip of iron from the shop and hammered it flat on the porch stone. He curled one end into a small hook and set it by the stove for her kettle. Not a grand gift. A daily one. She tested it, set the kettle there, and looked at him long. Then she signed, "Stay." He answered slowly but surely. Us, evening came easily. The river muttered only to itself. The bell by the door whispered when the breeze passed. The sun rose softly over clean earth. The cottonwoods clicked their small thank yous. John stirred the stove and set 2 plates without thinking. Habit, honest and new. Mara opened the door and let air pass through the house like a hymn. She hung her shawl on its leather strap and touched the key on the nail. Promise kept. They ate eggs and bread. After, John fetched the apple box and lifted out a ring he had hammered from a wagon spring. Plain iron polished on his palm. He set it on the table, not grand, only steady. "I have no fine words," he said, "but I will keep the house and keep you safe as I am able." Mara looked at the ring, then at him. She did not reach first. She drew on the slate, 2 hands building a fence. Then she signed over his plate, slow and clear. "I hear you." She took the ring and slipped it onto a leather cord she wore, a practical place close to the heart, safe in work. She touched his wrist and signed back, "I'm learning." He copied the shapes and did not hurry. Slow right over, fast wrong. They spent the day in small work that said more than talk. He fixed a loose hinge on the cupboard. She set seed in the last row where the soil held warmth. He greased the wagon axle. She checked the school rope and wrote a note for Mrs. Keene. The town moved around them with a shape, neighbors nodding, F fencing, Pike practicing signs at his window. At supper, John lit the porch lamp. He poured coffee into 2 cups and set them side by side. Mara drew a short line on her slate and held it up. "Us keeps." Then she wiped the board clean and wrote 3 words. "Home is earned." She earned once, night came mild. Crickets worked. The river spoke like an old friend telling a quiet story. They stood by the doorway a while, not to watch for trouble, only to feel the house breathe and the fence hold. At first light, Mara chalked a sentence on the shelf above the table in letters. "Today will be kind." John set the kettle to sing. 2 mugs steamed where morning found them. Wind moved under the eaves and the story walked forward into mouths to tell it true. Thanks for listening to Silence at My Table. If this story warmed you, tap like. It helps more people find it. Subscribe for more clean, heartstrong frontier romances. And hit the bell so you never miss a new episode. Tell me in the comments, which moment spoke to you most? The bell drill, the flood rescue, or the final 2 cups on the table? I read every reply.